Hello, I'm here with Lauren Davis. She is a nurse at Atrium, and I'm going to interview her on what it is to be a leadership and management in nursing. Okay, Lauren, thank you for agreeing to meet with me.
You're
All
welcome.
right, so how did you become a nurse leader? Tell us what got you started.
In 2007, I graduated from UNC Charlotte with my bachelor's degree. I went straight out of high school on into a 4-year degree program because I'd always heard there was more opportunity for advancement as you progressed into your nursing career. About 7 or 8 years after I graduated, I had moved into the charge role, and I just felt like there was more out there for me working with the staff in our department. In 2015, they revamped the assistant nurse manager role and developed the clinical supervisor role. And at that point, I decided, you know what, I think this is something that I'd be interested in. I'm still going to be able to have my patient contact because they said that the role would be still working on the floor, but you're also going to be kind of overseeing a group of teammates within the department. So I decided to apply, and I received the position, and I have very much so enjoyed it since.
Very good. All right, and so you did the leadership style questionnaire. So
Yes.
what is your leadership style, and was it different than what you thought it would be?
So I actually pretty much agree with the survey that I took, the questionnaire. It said that I was a democratic leadership style, which I totally agree with, simply because I am able to make decisions when needed to, make those, whether they be a quick decision, whether it be a decision what's going to be best for the department. But I also like to include others in those decisions if that's possible. Like to say, hey, Kelly, how do you feel about this? Moving forward, we're going to make a change. Like, what is your opinion? So I like to incorporate that as well. So I was not surprised whenever I took the survey to see what my style was.
All right, so she is democratic. Okay, and what are your roles and responsibilities at your agency? What are your roles and responsibilities here? And you actually have two.
Yes.
Kind of.
So I am a clinical supervisor for the emergency department. We have about 110 staff members, and we have 5 clinical supervisors. So it's kind of, charge nurse, chain of command would be like charge nurse, clinical supervisor, and then the manager. So we have divided our teammates into teams of 5, and I have about 22 to 23 teammates underneath me that I, speak with daily, talk to, make sure that they're keeping up on their education, all their required documentation needs. I do follow up with them whether they need counseling for whether it be attendance or whether it be performance. But I also still work side by side of them on the floor taking care of patients. So I think that kind of gives a different type of feel and look and respect because you're still out there doing the jobs with them, but you do still hold them accountable in other ways.
And then you have another role as...
Oh, yes.
What's the other one? What's the other one you do? It's okay.
So each clinical supervisor kind of has a particular duty. My particular duty right now is overseeing the stroke program here at the hospital. So I'm the interim stroke program coordinator, and so I collaborate with the inpatient units as well as the Atrium system as a whole. I have weekly meetings where I meet with the other stroke programmers across the system, making sure that we hit our metrics, making sure our quality improvement goals are being met, making sure that we, are just taking care of our patients at the best of our ability and that they're getting the care that they need.
And how many hours a week would you say? Because that sounds like 2 full-time
Right.
jobs.
So right now it is technically kind of 2 full-time jobs put together. So I would say my time right now as a clinical supervisor is probably less. So I probably have more like 15 hours out of a 40-hour week for clinical supervisor duties and probably 25 or so for the stroke program role.
Very good. Okay. And then we're asking you to describe the organizational structure of your facility, top down, down up, shared governance. What do you think?
So I think here at Atrium, we're kind of a hybrid of multiple different structures. Of course, there's always going to be top-down things that happen. Most recently, there's been a uniform change that we actually haven't gotten out there to all of the staff members yet. It is a top-down change. It is a, vice president of nursing for the Atrium system has decided that nurses need to wear one color, CNAs need to wear another color, and unfortunately that's not something that we can change here at the facility level or even in the departmental level. But we do have shared governance committees for our hospital. They meet monthly. The meetings consist of people from all the units coming together to discuss changes, to discuss possible improvements, and then they are pushed out to the departmental level. And then we also have a unit-based council on the that meet monthly for the departmental level that looks at processes and procedures throughout just our emergency department to see if there's any quality improvements that can be made there. And that is, again, that's kind of collaborative across the system. Across the department.
Okay, so it's just kind of bottom from top down, and then
Kind
we
of,
all just sort of working together. I like the
Yes.
idea of this a hybrid. Okay, and so what model of care delivery is utilized at your facility and in our unit, and which do you think works best?
well, thinking about this, I've seen a few different type of models here in our department over the time. When we moved into our newer emergency department, we went to more of the team approach as far as 2 nurses caring for about 8 patients. And we have since changed into the role of, 1 primary nurse taking care of the 4 patients in that particular assignment. But I think the teamwork role does play a huge part in that, yes, there is 1 nurse taking care of those patients, but there's a lot of teamwork that goes on with taking care of those. So if you have a patient who's very, very sick, and I have a patient who's a minor care patient who doesn't have a lot of needs, I would still walk over, help you, check on you, make sure your needs are met. And the charge nurse kind of looks into that to kind of play a role in, making sure that the I don't want to say share the wealth, but kind of spreading the wealth across the department based on acuity and level of care.
Yeah, that's important. You don't want your nurses to be overwhelmed, because that can happen. Okay. All right. And what is an ethical dilemma you have faced as a nurse leader, and how did you handle it?
So I will say my ethical dilemma that I faced as a nurse leader would be right after I became a clinical supervisor. They divided us into teams where each clinical supervisor had certain people on their team. And one of the people on my team was a friend, and they told us to check our teams, make sure we wouldn't have any conflicts of interest or anything. Truly didn't think I had a conflict of interest. We were friends, but we weren't at each other's houses going to different places. And a month and a half after I became a clinical supervisor, I was designated with the task to investigate her for diversion. Ethically, I knew what I had to do. I knew that as a supervisor, this was my role, and this was something that I needed to make sure that I did correctly. It was a dilemma for me because she was a friend, and I didn't want to believe it. But the more that I got into the charts and checking the charts, I knew there was a problem. And so I definitely had to make sure I reported it appropriately. It wasn't only hurting her, it was hurting our patients. And it was a big ethical dilemma that even 5 years out, I still think about. We are still acquaintances. I wouldn't say we're friends, but that was my first big duty as a clinical supervisor, and I'll always remember that.
That was hard, and you've probably been faced with many more since.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, in terms of fiscal management, how are planning and budgeting related as you see it?
Yeah, so budgeting and planning on the clinical supervisor level isn't something that we sit down and look at numbers. However, we definitely have to be very cognizant of the budget and also the planning. And just kind of the best way I can think of to describe that is most recently with COVID, when our volume has been lower, but sometimes our acuity is higher, but the budget doesn't allow for so many nurses when there's not enough patients. So we have to be very cognizant in that we are flexing appropriately, but we also have to have the amount of staff to take care of the critical patients. So it becomes a very fluid situation. It's always changing. So we may say we have so many nurses staffed today, but we might only see 100 patients. So that means that, yes, we have to be planning ahead to get so many nurses flexed out. So you have to look at the number of nurses and the number of patients. And in my brain, it's much easier to say, okay, we've seen this many patients. That means I can have this many nurses. And we have to flex accordingly. But again, if the acuity is higher, it's more difficult to do that. So you just have to be very cognizant. Budgeting and planning are hand in hand. You can't always plan for the budget, but you have to have an idea of what's going on for that.
You do, and also it can be really scary for nurses who say, we need an extra person because we have that one bad patient
Mhm.
who's taking all of my time, and I have 3 other ones that are suffering, or maybe you've
Right.
got newer nurses that,
Right.
no, it can be a challenge.
It's
I
very
understand
difficult
that.
sometimes.
Yeah. All right. What skills do you use to successfully communicate?
I think my communication skills, I'm always open-minded to what the other person is saying. If there's something that comes up when I'm trying to communicate, I need to make sure that I can empathize with them as to what's going on. I would say that, just being very positive and open-minded, I do a lot better that way when talking with others. And I have to be able to see their perspective as well.
Yeah, people need to be heard. And what about what skills do you use to delegate and motivate your workforce?
So as far as delegation, I think it's more so not necessarily a skill, it's just an understanding. I think that when you delegate a task out to someone, they have to realize that that's something that, yes, I'm able to do it. Yes, I've done it before. But at this point is something I'm asking you to do because I may have something else to do. I think in being very positive and being very open with the person, it's more so well received when you're delegating a task. And as far as motivation as a clinical supervisor, I try to do little positive tidbits of, whether it be a candygram or a little card. It never hurt to give someone a card that just says thank you. I try to do little thank you gifts, whether it be a Reese cup that says, have I told you recently how much I appreciate
Yeah.
you? As corny as it sounds, I think it really does make a difference in the day-to-day when someone's really tied up. But I think I try to use those skills of just being positive and putting myself back in their shoes.
Okay. And if you had to give one statement of advice to new nurse leaders, what would it be?
I think it would be a combination of don't take it personally, because sometimes people are using you as just their outlet. You can't take a lot of the comments personally. I think that's been hard for me over the years, is to understand that, yes, there could be people who are upset, and they might not necessarily be upset with you, but maybe upset with the process, and so don't take it personally. I also think that you need to lead by example, and a lot of people may disagree with my next statement, but I think you need to lead with your heart. A lot of people may say, oh, you shouldn't put your heart into it, but I think if you don't, then you don't show that connection, and you don't show that emotional support behind it. So I think that don't take it personally, lead by example, and lead with your heart would be the best advice that I could give.
All right.
All right.
Thank you so much for
Thank
sitting down
you.
with us.
You're welcome.